Jake Stone sat in the corner of the waiting room, his weathered hands folded in his lap. The old soldier looked out of place among the fancy alien diplomats walking around the space station. His simple Earth military uniform was clean but worn, nothing like the shiny robes and metal suits the other species wore. The space station Harmony 7 was huge, bigger than most Earth cities. It spun slowly in space, creating artificial gravity for the thousands of beings inside. Through the large windows, Jake could see ships from dozens of different worlds docked at the station's many ports. Some ships looked like smooth eggs. Others had sharp points and glowing lights. The human ships looked plain and ugly next to them. Bill Murphy walked over to Jake, his face showing worry. Murphy was Earth's main diplomat, a thin man with gray hair who always seemed nervous around aliens. He carried a datapad and kept checking it every few seconds. "Jake, I need to ask you something," Murphy said, sitting down next to the veteran. "The Galactic Broadcasting Network wants to interview you today." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Me? Why would they want to talk to an old soldier?" "They specifically asked for you. The host is someone called Zara Prime. She's from the Zentorian Empire." Murphy looked uncomfortable. "She's known for asking hard questions." Jake had heard of the Zentorians. They were tall, blue-skinned aliens who thought they were smarter than everyone else. They had joined the galactic community only 50 years ago but acted like they owned the place. Their home world was rich and peaceful, and they looked down on species that had to fight for survival. "What does she want to?" "No?" Jake asked. Murphy checked his datapad again. "The interview is supposed to be about human expansion into space, about our recent conflicts with other species. She says she wants to give humans a chance to explain themselves." Jake snorted. "Sounds like she's already made up her mind about us." "Maybe, but we need good relations with all the species here. This peace summit is important. If we can show them that humans aren't the monsters they think we are." Murphy's voice trailed off. Through the window, Jake watched a group of young alien beings playing some kind of floating ball game. They laughed and chased each other without a care in the world. Jake remembered when human children could play like that, before the wars started, before Earth had to fight just to survive in space. "How many people will be watching?" Jake asked. "Billions. The interview will be broadcast across the entire galaxy. Every major species will see it." Jake was quiet for a long moment. He had spent 40 years in the Earth Defense Force, fighting battles that most people would never hear about. He had seen things that would give normal people nightmares, but the idea of talking to billions of aliens on live television made him more nervous than any battle. Lisa Carter approached them from across the room. She was a reporter from Earth News Network, a young woman with bright eyes and quick movements. She had been covering the Peace Summit for the past week. "Colonel Stone," she said, using Jake's old military rank. "I heard about the interview. Are you sure you want to do this?" "Why wouldn't I?" Jake asked. Lisa looked around to make sure no aliens were listening. "I've been researching Zara Prime. She's not just a news host. She's basically a professional attack dog. She finds guests she thinks are weak and tears them apart on live television. Her show is called Truth Exposed, but it's really just her making people look stupid." Murphy frowned. "Why would she want to interview Jake specifically?" "Because she thinks humans are violent primitives," Lisa said bluntly. "She's been saying it for months on her show. She wants to prove to the galaxy that we don't belong in space, that we're too dangerous to be trusted." Jake stood up and walked to the window. The Peace Summit had been going on for 3 days, and it wasn't going well for Earth. Most of the alien species saw humans as newcomers who caused too much trouble. They pointed to the recent war with the Corvan Empire as proof that humans were too aggressive. What they didn't understand was that humans hadn't started that war. The Corvans had attacked human colonies without warning, killing thousands of innocent people. Earth had tried to negotiate, but the Corvans only understood strength. So humans had given them strength, more than they bargained for. "She's going to ask about the Corvan War," Jake said without turning from the window. "Probably," Murphy agreed. "She'll want to know why we fought instead of finding a peaceful solution." Jake almost laughed. Peaceful solution. As if the Corvans had been interested in peace when they were bombing human schools and hospitals. As if any of these aliens would have acted differently if their own people were being murdered. There's another problem, Lisa said quietly. She's going to ask about the Ghost Fleet. Jake's jaw tightened. The Ghost Fleet incident was classified. Information, known only to the highest levels of Earth's government and military. For 3 months during the Corvan War, 50 human ships had simply disappeared. No communication, no trace, nothing. The aliens thought the ships had run away, or been destroyed. How does she know about that? Murphy asked. Someone leaked information to her, Lisa said. She's been hinting about it on her show. She thinks it proves that humans are cowards who run when things get tough. Jake turned back to face them. His eyes were hard, like pieces of gray stone. When is this interview? Murphy checked his datapad. In 30 minutes, the studio is on level 7 of the station. Colonel, you don't have to do this, Lisa said. We could find an excuse, say you're sick or busy with military matters. Jake shook his head. No. If this alien wants to talk about humans, then she can talk to one. Jake, please be careful, Murphy said. Don't let her make you angry. Don't give her what she wants. And what does she want? She wants you to lose your temper, to prove that humans are violent and dangerous. She'll push and push until you snap. Jake smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't a pleasant smile. She can push all she wants. I've been pushed by experts. As they walked toward the studio, Jake thought about all the battles he had fought, all the friends he had lost, all the difficult decisions he had made. This interview might be the most important battle of his life, not because his own life was at stake, but because the future of humanity in space might depend on how he handled one arrogant alien with a television show. The studio doors opened ahead of them, and Jake Stone walked in to face his next war. The television studio was bright and cold. Jake Stone walked onto the stage and saw cameras floating in the air around 2 chairs. The chairs faced each other across a small table made of some kind of glowing crystal. Behind them, a large screen showed images of different planets and spaceships. Zara Prime was already sitting in one chair looking at her notes. She was tall and thin, with blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the studio lights. Her eyes were large and silver, and when she looked up at Jake, he could see she thought she was better than him. She wore a flowing robe that changed colors as she moved. Colonel Stone, she said, her voice smooth but with an edge to it. Please sit down. Jake sat in the other chair. It was uncomfortable, clearly made for alien bodies, not humans. The floating cameras moved closer to him, and he could see red lights blinking on them. Millions of beings across the galaxy were about to watch this conversation. A young alien with too many arms gave a countdown with his fingers. Live in 5, 4, 3, 2. Zara Prime's whole manner changed. She smiled at the camera, but it was the kind of smile a snake might give before it bit you. Good afternoon, Galaxy. I'm Zara Prime, and this is Truth Exposed. Today we have a very special guest, Colonel Jake Stone of the human military. She turned to Jake, and her smile got even colder. Colonel Stone, humans have been in space for less than 200 years, yet you've already been involved in 17 major conflicts. Why do you think that is? Jake had expected this question. Sometimes conflict finds you whether you want it or not. But 17 wars, Colonel. 17. The Zentorian Empire has been in space for over 1,000 years, and we've had only 3 conflicts, all of which we resolved through peaceful negotiation. Good for you, Jake said simply. Zara Prime looked surprised. She had clearly expected him to get defensive. Don't you think there's something to learn from species that choose diplomacy over violence? I think there's something to learn from everyone, Jake replied. But diplomacy only works when both sides want to find a solution. Are you saying that in all 17 of these conflicts, the other side was completely unreasonable? That humans were never at fault? Jake was quiet for a moment. He thought about the wars he had fought, the mistakes that had been made, the times when human commanders had made bad choices. But he also thought about the times when there had been no choice at all. I'm saying that sometimes you have to fight to protect what matters. Zara Prime leaned forward. Let's talk about your most recent conflict, the war with the Corvan Empire. 12 billion Corvans died in that war, Colonel. 12 billion. How do you justify that? Jake's face didn't change, but something cold moved. behind his eyes. How many humans died, Ms. Prime? The reports say approximately 50 million humans were killed. That's right, 50 million. Men, women, children. The Corvins killed them in the first month of the war before Earth even knew we were at war. Zara Prime waved her hand dismissively. But surely there could have been negotiations. Surely both sides could have found a peaceful solution that didn't result in the deaths of 12 billion beings. The Corvins weren't interested in negotiations, Jake said. They wanted our colony worlds. They wanted our resources. They wanted us gone. But 12 billion deaths, Colonel. Doesn't that number mean anything to you? Jake stared at her for a long moment. Around the galaxy, beings leaned closer to their screens. Even the camera operators in the studio seemed to hold their breath. Every death means something, Jake said quietly. Every single one. But I'll ask you again, Ms. Prime. How many humans died? 50 million, but 50 million in the first month, before we fought back. What do you think that number would have been if we hadn't fought back? What do you think would have happened to the remaining 2 billion humans in those colonies? Zara Prime's smile flickered. Surely the Corvins wouldn't have. The Corvins were already doing it, Jake interrupted. They were systematically killing every human they found. Their own military records, which we captured, showed they planned to eliminate all human presence in that sector of space. Even if that's true, the response was disproportionate. 12 billion deaths. Were not our goal, Jake said, his voice getting harder. Our goal was to protect our people. Our goal was to stop the killing. Zara Prime shuffled her notes, looking for a different angle of attack. Let's talk about human military tactics. Your species has a reputation for being unusually brutal in warfare. Other species have complained that humans don't follow the accepted rules of galactic combat. What rules? The Galactic Convention on Warfare clearly states that combat should be limited to military targets, that civilian populations should be protected, that unnecessary destruction should be avoided. Jake almost smiled. Ms. Prime, who wrote those rules? The Galactic Council, of course. When? The convention was signed 400 years ago by all civilized species. All civilized species except humans, because we weren't in space yet. We didn't get a vote on those rules. Zara Prime's eyes narrowed. Are you saying humans don't believe in protecting civilian populations? I'm saying we believe in winning wars quickly so fewer people die overall. By any means necessary? By effective means. The studio was completely quiet now. Even the floating cameras seemed to hover more still, as if they were afraid to move and disturb the tension building between the two speakers. Zara Prime tried a different approach. Colonel, many species in the galaxy view humans as primitive and violent. You're so. Planet still has nations that fight each other. You still have crime and poverty and war. How can a species that can't even achieve peace on its own world expect to be trusted in space? Jake looked directly into the main camera. Ms. Prime, what's the crime rate on your home world? The Zentorian Empire has virtually eliminated crime through proper social structure and advanced technology. What about poverty? We have achieved economic equality for all citizens. What about war? The Zentorian people are united under one government. We have no internal conflicts. Jake nodded slowly. Sounds perfect. Tell me, how did you achieve all that? Zara Prime looked pleased with herself. Through centuries of social evolution, through choosing cooperation over competition, through valuing intelligence and wisdom over brute strength. No, Jake said quietly. You achieved it because you never had to fight for it. I beg your pardon? Your world was rich from the beginning. Plenty of resources, perfect climate, no natural disasters. You never had to compete for survival. You never had to make hard choices. You never had to decide between your own people and someone else's. Zara Prime's smile was completely gone now. Are you suggesting that violence is necessary for social development? I'm suggesting that you can't judge a species by standards they never had the luxury to meet. The interview was not going the way Zara Prime had planned. She looked down at her notes again, searching for something that would put the human back on the defensive. Zara Prime flipped through her notes with quick, nervous movements. The interview was not going as she had planned. She had expected the human to get angry, to show the violent nature that her research had promised. Instead, he sat calmly in his chair, answering her questions with quiet confidence. She decided to try her strongest weapon. "Colonel Stone," she said, her voice taking on a tone of fake concern. "I want to talk about something that I think our viewers deserve to know about. During the Corvin War, 50 human warships simply disappeared for 3 months. No communication, no trace, nothing. Many military experts believe these ships ran away from the fighting." Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. The floating cameras moved slightly closer, sensing that something important was about to happen. "The Ghost Fleet," Jake said simply. "Yes, that's what some people call it. The Ghost Fleet incident. Can you explain to our viewers what really happened? Where did those 50 ships go when the fighting got too hard?" Across the galaxy, billions of beings leaned forward to hear the answer. The Ghost Fleet had become a legend, a mystery that no human government had ever explained. Military historians had written books guessing what had happened. Some said the ships had been destroyed. Others said they had run away to hide in deep space. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He looked past Zara Prime, past the cameras, as if he was seeing something far away. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "You really want to know what happened out there?" "Our viewers have a right to the truth," Zara Prime said, smelling victory. She was sure she was about to expose the greatest act of human cowardice in galactic history. "The truth," Jake repeated slowly. "All right, Ms. Prime, I'll tell you the truth." He turned to look directly at the main camera. When he spoke, it was as if he was talking to each viewer personally. Those 50 ships didn't disappear because they were running away. They disappeared because they were going somewhere the Corvin military couldn't find them. Somewhere behind enemy lines. Deep behind enemy lines. Zara Prime frowned. This wasn't the story she had expected. Behind enemy lines? For what purpose? To do what needed to be done. That's not an answer, Colonel. What exactly were these ships doing for 3 months while the rest of the human fleet was fighting and dying? Jake's eyes hardened. They were fighting and dying too, just not where anyone could see them. In the control room of the studio, alien technicians checked their equipment. The readings showed that viewership was climbing. Word was spreading across the galaxy that something important was happening on Truth Exposed. "Colonel Stone," Zara Prime said, her voice getting sharper. "I've done my research. During those 3 months, the Corvin Empire reported no major battles behind their lines, no significant losses. If your Ghost Fleet was fighting, what were they fighting?" "Time," Jake said quietly. "I don't understand." Jake leaned forward slightly, in his chair. "Ms. Prime, what do you know about Corvin military doctrine?" "I know they were a proud warrior race with advanced technology and superior numbers. That's what everyone knows. What do you know about their policy regarding their own civilian populations during wartime?" Zara Prime looked confused. "Their civilian populations? What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," Jake said. "Because when the Corvan military started losing the war, when they realized that humans weren't going to be the easy conquest they had expected, they made a decision. A decision that changed everything." The studio was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the space station systems seemed to quiet down, as if the entire universe was listening. "What decision?" Zara Prime asked, though she was beginning to sense that she didn't want to know the answer. "They decided that if they couldn't win the war, they would make sure there was nothing left for humans to conquer. They activated Protocol 7. Several aliens in the studio audience gasped. Protocol 7 was known throughout the galaxy, though few species had ever been desperate enough to use it. It was the complete sterilization of a civilization's own worlds to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. "That's impossible," Zara Prime said quickly. "The Corvin Empire would never destroy their own worlds, their own people." The Corvin Military High Command issued the order 18 weeks into the war. Jake continued, his voice steady and factual. They were going to sterilize 47 Corvin worlds rather than let humans capture them. 47 worlds with a combined civilian population of over 8 billion beings. You're lying, Zara Prime said, but her voice lacked conviction. Corvan civilians started sending distress signals on old emergency frequencies. Frequencies that the Corvan military thought humans didn't monitor. But we did monitor them. We heard every desperate call for help. Jake stood up from his chair and walked to the large screen behind them. With a gesture, he activated it, showing a star map of Corvan space. The Ghost Fleet had 2 missions, he said, pointing to different systems on the map. First, to locate and disable the planet killer weapons before they could be used. Second, to evacuate as many civilians as possible before the Corvan military could stop them. That's... Zara Prime started to speak, then stopped. The implications of what Jake was saying were starting to sink in. 50 human ships against the entire Corvan home fleet, Jake continued. No support, no reinforcements, no way home if the mission failed. They had to stay hidden, move fast, and complete their objectives before the Corvan military figured out what they were doing. But the report said there were no major battles behind Corvan lines, Zara Prime protested weakly. Jake smiled, but it was a sad smile. There weren't any major battles because the Ghost Fleet wasn't trying to conquer anything. They were trying to save lives. You can't fight a war and run a rescue operation at the same time, so they chose rescue. I don't believe you, Zara Prime said, but she was looking at her notes frantically, trying to find something to contradict what Jake was telling her. You don't have to believe me, Jake said, but maybe you should ask some of the other delegates here at the Peace Summit, specifically the Corvan delegates. The Corvan delegates? Ask them about their families. Ask them how their children and parents survived the war. Ask them who saved their lives when their own military was ready to kill them. Zara Prime's face went pale, or as pale as blue skin could go. You're saying that humans saved Corvan civilians? I'm saying that 50 human ships spent 3 months behind enemy lines fighting impossible odds, not to conquer worlds or win glory, but to save the lives of beings whose government had declared war on us. How many? She whispered. How many? What? How many Corvan civilians did you save? Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Not enough. We saved about 2 million before the Corvan military caught on and started hunting us in earnest, but it wasn't enough. We couldn't save them all. The studio was dead silent. Across the galaxy, beings stared at their screens in shock. This was not the story they had expected to hear about the mysterious Ghost Fleet. The silence in the studio stretched on for long seconds. Zara Prime stared at Jake Stone, her silver eyes wide with something that looked like fear. She had come into this interview expecting to destroy a human's reputation. Instead, she was hearing a story that challenged everything she thought she knew about the war. 2 million, she repeated slowly. You're claiming that humans saved 2 million Corvan lives? I'm not claiming anything, Jake said, walking back to his chair. I'm telling you what happened. The Ghost Fleet saved 2 million Corvan civilians before the operation was discovered. But that doesn't make sense, Zara Prime said, her voice getting higher. Why would humans risk their own ships and soldiers to save enemy civilians? It's not logical. It's not strategic. Jake sat down and looked at her with tired eyes. You're right. It wasn't logical. It wasn't strategic. But it was necessary. Necessary for what? For us to live with ourselves afterward. Zara Prime's hands were shaking slightly as she looked through her notes. Nothing in her research had prepared her for this. Colonel Stone, even if what you're saying is true, it doesn't change the fact that 12 billion Corvans died in that war. 12 billion. You keep saying that number like it means something to me, Jake said quietly. Like you think I don't know it. Like you think I don't remember every single report that came across my desk. Then how can you justify it? Jake was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was so soft that the microphones in the studio had to amplify it for the viewers to hear. I was there when we got the first distress signals from Corvan civilians. I was in the command center when we intercepted communications showing that the Corvin military was preparing to activate Protocol 7. Do you know what that felt like, Ms. Prime? I can't imagine, she said. And for the first time in the interview, she sounded sincere. It felt like standing at the edge of hell and watching innocent people fall in. We had a choice. We could focus on winning the war against the Corvin military, or we could try to save lives. We couldn't do both. Jake stood up again and walked to the star map. He pointed to a cluster of systems deep in Corvin space. The Ghost Fleet operations lasted 97 days. In that time, those 50 ships fought over 200 separate engagements with Corvin military forces. They lost 18 ships and over 3,000 crew members, all to save people who belonged to a species that was trying to wipe out humanity. But the 12 billion deaths happened because we failed, Jake said, his voice getting harder. Because we couldn't save everyone. Because there were too many worlds, too many people, and not enough time. Zara Prime looked confused. Failed? But you said you saved 2 million people. 2 million out of 8 billion who were marked for death. That's not success, Ms. Prime. That's failure on a scale that keeps you awake at night for the rest of your life. The cameras zoomed in on Jake's face. Viewers across the galaxy could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of memories he carried. You want to know about human nature? Jake continued. You want to understand why we fight the way we do? It's because we know what failure looks like. We know what happens when we're not strong enough, fast enough, or smart enough to save everyone who needs saving. But surely the Corvin military could have stopped the protocol. They could have changed their minds. Jake laughed, but it was a bitter sound. The Corvin High Command was ready to kill their own people rather than surrender. They saw their civilians as property, not as lives worth saving. When we started rescuing people, they didn't thank us. They started hunting us, more aggressively. I still don't understand how this justifies the deaths of 12 billion beings. It doesn't justify anything, Jake said sharply. Nothing justifies that many deaths, but you're asking the wrong question. What should I be asking? You should be asking how many more would have died if we hadn't acted. If we had let the Corvin military carry out their plans. If we had followed the Galactic Convention on Warfare that you mentioned earlier. Zara Prime frowned. What do you mean? The convention says that wars should be fought only between military forces, that civilian populations should be left alone. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Very civilized. Of course it does. That's the point of having rules. But what happens when one side doesn't follow the rules? What happens when the enemy starts killing civilians and your own rules say you can't do anything about it? Jake walked closer to Zara Prime's chair. She leaned back slightly, suddenly aware of how much bigger and stronger the human was than her. The Corvin military was using their civilian populations as shields, Jake said. They put military installations in cities. They put weapons factories next to schools and hospitals. They forced their own people to work in war industries. That's terrible, but according to your Galactic Convention, we weren't supposed to attack those targets. We were supposed to let the Corvins use their own people as human shields while they built more weapons to kill our people. Surely, there could have been another way. What way? Negotiate with leaders who were ready to kill billions of their own people? Wait for the Galactic Council to pass a resolution while more human colonies were destroyed? Ask politely for the Corvins to please stop committing genocide? Jake's voice was getting stronger now, more intense. Around the galaxy, viewers found themselves leaning forward, hanging on every word. We tried diplomacy first, Ms. Prime. We tried economic sanctions. We tried working through the Galactic Council. But while we were trying to be civilized, human colonies were being wiped out. Human families were being murdered. And nobody in the galaxy seemed to care as long as it wasn't happening to them. That's not true, Zara Prime protested. The Galactic Council issued several strong statements, condemning Corvin aggression. Strong statements, Jake repeated. That's what you call a response to genocide? Strong statements? The Council believed in peaceful resolution. The Council believed in staying out of a war that didn't affect them directly, just like they stayed out of the Andromedan crisis, just like they stayed out of the Outer Rim conflicts. The Galactic Council is very good at issuing strong statements after the killing is over. Zara Prime was getting desperate now. She could feel the interview slipping away from her completely. Colonel Stone, even if everything you're saying is true, it doesn't change the fact that humans chose violence over peace. You chose war over diplomacy. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at her. No, Ms. Prime. We chose to protect our people over protecting our reputation. We chose to save lives over following rules written by species who have never had to make that choice. But at what cost? At whatever cost was necessary. The studio fell silent again. In the control room, the director gestured frantically at his staff. Viewership numbers were climbing rapidly as word spread across the galaxy about what was happening on the show. Zara Prime looked down at her notes one more time. She had one more weapon to use, one more attack that might still save her interview. Colonel Stone, she said, her voice taking on a new tone of accusation. There are reports that during the Ghost Fleet operations, human forces committed war crimes, that they used forbidden weapons and tactics, that they violated every principle of civilized warfare. Jake's eyes went cold. What reports? Corvan military records speak of human ships using banned nanoweapons, of human soldiers executing Corvan officers who tried to surrender, of entire Corvan installations being destroyed with everyone inside. Those records are accurate, Jake said quietly. Zara Prime smiled for the first time since the interview had started going wrong. So you admit it. You admit that humans committed war crimes. I admit that we did what we had to do to save lives. By breaking every law of warfare. By ignoring laws that were designed to protect the guilty while the innocent died. Jake Stone stood perfectly still in the bright studio lights. The question about war crimes hung in the air like a weapon that Zara Prime thought would finally destroy him. But Jake didn't look destroyed. He looked tired, but also strangely relieved, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask him this question for a very long time. You want to know about the war crimes? He said quietly. All right. Let me tell you about war crimes. Zara Prime leaned forward, smelling victory. Finally, the human would have to admit to the brutal, illegal acts that proved humans were too dangerous for civilized space. On day 37 of the Ghost Fleet operation, Jake began, my ship received a distress signal from a Corvan civilian transport. They were carrying 5,000 refugees, mostly children and elderly, trying to escape before their own military could activate Protocol 7 on their world. What does this have to do with? The transport was being escorted by 3 Corvan military cruisers, Jake continued, ignoring her interruption. When we approached to offer assistance, the military ships opened fire on us. Standard procedure, right? We were enemies. Jake walked to the star map again and pointed to a specific system. But then something happened that your galactic convention doesn't account for. The Corvan military ships started firing on their own transport. They were trying to kill 5,000 of their own people, rather than let us save them. Zara Prime's mouth opened slightly. That's impossible. No military would kill their own civilians. The Corvan High Command had issued orders. Any civilian ship that accepted help from humans was to be destroyed immediately. They called it preventing contamination by human influence. The studio was dead quiet. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. So we had a choice, Jake said. Follow the Galactic Convention on Warfare, which says we should only engage military targets in open combat with proper warnings and surrender opportunities, or save 5,000 innocent lives. What did you do? Zara Prime whispered. We used nanoweapons to disable the Corvan military ships instantly. No warning, no chance to surrender, no civilized combat. The weapons destroyed their engines and weapon systems but left life support intact. Then we boarded their ships. That's a clear violation of laws written by species who never had to watch children die while following proper procedures, Jake finished. Yes, it was illegal. Yes, it was a war crime according to your convention. And yes, I ordered. Hazy Jake's voice got stronger as he continued. When we boarded those Corvan ships, we found their orders. Written orders to kill any civilian who tried to escape to human protection. Orders to destroy their own hospitals and schools, rather than let them fall into enemy hands. Orders to execute any Corvan officer who showed mercy to refugees. But surely you could have found another way. In the time it would have taken to follow proper surrender protocols. 5,000 innocent people would have died, so we chose to save them instead of following rules. Zara Prime looked at her notes desperately. The reports also mention human soldiers executing Corvin officers. Yes, Jake said simply. We did that too. How can you admit to such brutality? Jake walked closer to her chair. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with controlled anger. We found a Corvin detention facility on the fourth moon of Korvac Prime. It was holding 3,000 civilian prisoners, including 800 children. The Corvin officers running the facility had orders to kill all the prisoners before we could reach them. Surely you could have captured the officers, and the execution had already begun when we arrived, Jake said, his words cutting through her protest like a knife. We could hear the screaming from outside the facility. We could see the bodies. Zara Prime went very pale. The Corvin officers were following their orders, systematically murdering unarmed civilians, men, women, children. Some of the children were barely old enough to walk. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. So yes, Ms. Prime, we executed those officers. We didn't give them a trial. We didn't follow proper procedures. We didn't offer them a chance to surrender. We found them murdering children and we killed them on the spot. That's not justice, Zara Prime said weakly. No, Jake agreed. It's not justice. Justice would have been stopping it before it started. Justice would have been a galaxy that cared enough to prevent genocide instead of writing strongly worded statements about it afterward. The main camera zoomed in on Jake's face. Across the galaxy, billions of viewers saw the pain and anger in his eyes. You want to talk about war crimes? Jake continued. Let me tell you about real war crimes. A Corvin general named Vex Corvala ordered the poisoning of an entire planet's water supply rather than let human forces capture it. 2 billion people died in agony over the course of 3 days. Where was the Galactic Council then? Where were your strongly worded statements? I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, because your people don't want to know. It's easier to blame humans for being violent than to admit that sometimes violence is the only thing that stops greater violence. Jake turned to face the main camera directly. You want to know why species across this galaxy fear humans? It's not because we're more violent than anyone else. It's not because we're primitive or brutal or uncivilized. Then why? Zara Prime asked, though she sounded like she was afraid of the answer. Because when we fight for something bigger than ourselves. Your people fight for territory, for resources, for pride. The Corvins fought for dominance. But humans, we fight so others don't have to. Jake's voice got stronger, more passionate. Every war crime we committed, every rule we broke, every law we violated, we did it to save lives. Not human lives. Not our allies' lives. Any lives. Even the lives of people whose government had declared war on us. But the cost was worth paying, Jake said firmly. Every single human who died in those operations knew what they were fighting for. They knew they weren't fighting to conquer worlds or win glory. They were fighting to save people they would never meet. People who might never even know their names. Jake walked back to his chair and sat down. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but carried across the silent studio. That's what you can't understand, Ms. Prime. That's what none of your civilized species can understand. We're not the monsters in this galaxy. We're the ones who stop the monsters, even when it means becoming monsters ourselves. Zara Prime stared at him, completely speechless. Around the galaxy, viewers sat in stunned silence as the true scope of human sacrifice became clear. The Ghost Fleet saved 2 million lives in 97 days, Jake continued. They broke every law of warfare to do it. They committed acts that your convention calls war crimes. And every single one of those crimes was worth it, because 2 million people are alive today who wouldn't be otherwise. But 12 billion still died, Zara Prime whispered. Yes, Jake said sadly. 12 billion died because we weren't strong enough, fast enough, or ruthless enough to save them all. That's the burden we carry. Not the guilt of the laws we broke, but the guilt of the lives we couldn't save. The interview had become something neither of them had expected. What had started as an attack on human brutality had become a revelation, of human sacrifice that shook the foundations of how the galaxy viewed the war. The silence in the studio stretched on for what felt like forever. Zara Prime sat in her chair staring at Jake Stone with wide, shocked eyes. Her silver skin had gone pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she held her notes. The confident, arrogant host who had started the interview was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and confused. Jake stood up slowly from his chair. The movement seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the studio. Camera operators remembered to breathe. Sound technicians checked their equipment, but nobody spoke. "You came into this interview thinking you knew who humans were," Jake said quietly. "You thought we were violent primitives who didn't belong in civilized space. You thought the Ghost Fleet was proof that we were cowards who ran away when things got difficult." Zara Prime opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "But now you know the truth," Jake continued. "The Ghost Fleet wasn't made up of cowards. It was made up of heroes who knew they might never come home. Heroes who broke every law in the galaxy to save people they had never met." Jake walked to the edge of the stage, where he could see some of the alien delegates who had come to watch the interview. Among them, he spotted 3 figures in dark robes. Corvan delegates, representatives of the species that had once tried to destroy humanity. "The funny thing is," Jake said, looking directly at the Corvan delegates, "some of the people we saved are here on this station right now." The cameras quickly swung around to follow his gaze. The Corvan delegates looked uncomfortable as millions of viewers across the galaxy suddenly focused on them. "Ambassador Kex Novara," Jake said, addressing one of the Corvans directly. "Your daughter was on that civilian transport we saved on day 37, the one your own military tried to destroy. She was 7 years old then. How old is she now?" Ambassador Novara stood up slowly. He was tall and gray-skinned, with the ritual scars that marked him as a member of the Corvan warrior caste. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "She is 16 now, Colonel Stone. She is studying to become a healer." "And Ambassador Track Wilson," Jake continued, turning to another Corvan. "Your elderly parents were in the detention facility, on the 4th moon of Korvac Prime, the facility where your own officers were executing prisoners." Ambassador Wilson nodded, tears running down his gray cheeks. "They lived for 10 more years after you saved them, Colonel. They died peacefully in their beds, surrounded by family, because of what your people did." Jake turned back to face Zara Prime. "This is what you can't understand. This is what your research didn't tell you. The people we brutally attacked have been thanking us for it ever since." Zara Prime finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "I didn't know. I thought the report said what people wanted them to say," Jake replied. "It's easier to call humans violent than to admit that sometimes violence is the only thing that stops greater evil." Jake walked back to his chair, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he stood behind it, his hands resting on the back. "You asked me earlier why humans have been involved in 17 conflicts since we entered space. You want to know the real answer?" Zara Prime nodded weakly. "Because 17 times innocent people were being hurt, and nobody else was willing to help them. 17 times the galaxy stood by and watched while the strong preyed on the weak. And 17 times humans decided that we couldn't live with ourselves if we did nothing." Jake's voice got stronger, more passionate. "The Andromedan Crisis, the Outer Rim Wars, the Slaver Rebellions, the Crystal Wars. Every single conflict humans have fought. We fought because someone needed protection and nobody else would provide it. But surely other species are very good at expressing concern," Jake interrupted. "They're excellent at forming committees and passing resolutions and making strongly worded statements. But when it comes time to actually do something, to actually risk their own people to save others, they suddenly become very busy with other matters." Jake looked around the studio, taking in all the alien faces watching him. "Do you know what? The most common request human embassies receive? It's not trade agreements or technology exchanges. It's protection requests. Species after species asking for human help when they're threatened by someone stronger." "Why?" Zara Prime asked. "Why do they ask humans?" "Because they know we'll say yes. Because they know that when humans give their word to protect someone, we keep that word, even if it costs us everything." Jake turned to face the main camera. One last time. You want to understand humans? Here's what you need to know. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We lose our tempers. We fight among ourselves. But when innocent people are in danger, when the strong prey on the weak, when nobody else will act, humans will stand up and fight. Not for glory, not for conquest, not for profit. We fight because it's the right thing to do. Even if the galaxy hates us for it, he continued. Even if we're called violent and primitive and dangerous. Even if people like you make television shows about how brutal we are. We'll keep fighting because that's who we are. Jake started walking toward the exit of the studio. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back at Zara Prime one last time. Next time you want to understand humans, Ms. Prime, maybe try asking us instead of telling us who we are. With that, he walked out of the studio, leaving Zara Prime alone with her cameras and her shattered assumptions. The interview continued for another few minutes, but Zara Prime barely spoke. She couldn't think of anything to say. Everything she had believed about humans had been turned upside down in the space of an hour. Finally, she looked into the main camera and said, "We'll be right back after this break." But her voice was hollow, empty. As the cameras stopped rolling, Zara Prime sat alone in the bright studio lights. Around the galaxy, billions of viewers turned off their screens or switched to other channels, but they couldn't stop thinking about what they had heard. The story of the Ghost Fleet spread from world to world, growing with each telling. Within days, public opinion across the galaxy began to shift. Species that had feared humans started to see them differently. Instead of violent, primitives, they saw protectors. Instead of dangerous aggressors, they saw reluctant heroes who bore the burden of doing what others could not or would not do. Requests for human protection increased dramatically. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges were arranged. The peace summit that had seemed doomed to failure suddenly became a great success. But Jake Stone didn't see any of that. He had returned to his quarters on the space station and then taken the first transport back to Earth. He had done his duty, told the truth when asked, and now he wanted to go home. On his small farm in the countryside, far from the politics of space and the noise of galactic media, Jake Stone tended his garden and tried to forget the faces of the people he hadn't been able to save. Because that was the burden humans carried. Not the weight of the violence they had committed, but the weight of the violence they had failed to prevent. And across the galaxy, when species faced threats they couldn't handle alone, they knew who to call. They called the humans. The ones who fought so others didn't have to.